Great deal.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I think we should read the call first
Yeah.
and
Then do roll call. We, the undersigned council members of the city of Marysville, hereby respectfully request that you call a special council meeting of the members of the governing body of said city to be held at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, August 19th, 2024 at the City Hall for the following purpose: to discuss water sewer rates and hear a report created by Get Great Rates, analyzing the city's water and sewer funds and rate structure. So roll call, please.
Snelling,
Present.
Ferris.
Here.
Behrens,
Here.
Keating,
Present.
Bikeman, Schrader,
Present.
Thrum. Here. Karaki.
Present.
7-0, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So I guess we can get right to it. Sir, could you introduce yourself to the group?
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Carl Brown. I'm the president of GettingGreatRates.com. All I do is rate analysis. I do things that are related to it, but it's always because it has to do with rate analysis. So I help folks like you all figure out where adequate and appropriately structured, hopefully fairly structured, but where adequate and fair rates are. So that's what I've done for you all in water and sewer. Now you actually combine sewer and stormwater, at least for funding purposes, and I'll tell you right off the bat, that's really not a fair way to charge for stormwater, but it's not unheard of. It does happen. It's not real common, but it does happen. So I'll talk a bit more about that. But I analyze rates to figure out where fair and adequate is. I've done 385 at this point, and you might figure out pretty soon that I'm a little bit anal retentive. And I consider that to be a strong point for a rate analyst, because there is lots and lots of data and information that gets thrown at me that may or may not be really important for water rates or for sewer rates or stormwater or electric or whatever it is. I get to sort through all that stuff, figure out what is really critical, and then figure out how that affects your rates, your finances going forward, your ability to be able to pay for capital improvements when they need to come along, all that sort of stuff. Essentially what I do is I build a spreadsheet model for each analysis that I do that virtually kind of replicates your real life water utility or sewer utility on the finance, funding, rates side. I don't get into operations, I don't do the capital improvements planning, I don't do grant acquisition, I don't do all that other stuff that does need to happen for the utility to be able to function right. But if it has an effect on finances, or if your finances, or lack of finances, affect the utility, then I model those effects back and forth, and then eventually where the rates need to be able to fund the utility right, and hopefully to fund it fairly. Now I say fund it fairly because fairness is in the eye of the beholder, and fairness needs to be played against practicality. Generally, and when I say generally, it's almost always, you arrive at the fairest water and the fairest sewer rate structure by assessing minimum charges that recover part of the capacity to serve. So you have a small system, and it doesn't cost a whole lot of money to build it. You get bigger and it costs more money to build it. You have certain customers that are peaky or very high flow customers, you need even bigger and more complicated water and sewer infrastructure. So the meter sized basis for rates is almost always the fairest structure for the minimum charge, because the customer that needs a 4-inch meter, because they're going to have all kinds of flow, they should pay more for the capacity that it costs to be able to serve them. To give you a number that's kind of handy, a 4-inch meter, a 4-inch simplex meter, has the peak flow, the sustainable peak flow capacity of 25 5/8-inch, basically residential size meters. So a customer that needs a 4-inch meter is absorbing 25 shares of the capacity of the water utility. And a similar thing is in play on the wastewater side. Now, if you're not metering water, then you can't assess a meter sized based minimum charge for sewer, but when you do meter water, you know, or you can know what the meter sizes are, so then you can assess stormwater rates on a meter size basis too. I've got that structure is the beginning structure for each one of the utilities, so I'll touch on those in the report. And then I have another structure which is, I'm not quite sure what it's really called, or if it's commonly called a particular name, but I call that structure, which is what you have, a description-based structure. So it could be in-town residential, out-of-town residential, in-town commercial, out-of-town, in-town industrial, out-of-town, bulk, the golf course, whatever it is that you have set up for rates. If you are charging rates based on the description, that's a description-based structure. You have that. Now I'm recommending that you switch to a meter size based structure, because when I analyze the distribution of your meter sizes, 80.7% of your meters are 2 inches or larger. So you start getting into pretty good peak flow capacity with a 2-inch meter. Below that, it's not terribly different than a 5/8 or 3/4 inch. And in some places, a 1-inch is even used, at least occasionally, for some residential connections. I don't usually like to recommend a description-based structure unless the large meters, 2-inch and larger, are down in the vicinity of 5% or so of the total number of meters. So you're almost double that. You're well into the range, the meter size range, where it makes good sense to charge based on meter size. Now back to the description that I gave you, where fairness is in the eye of the beholder. You got to consider practicality too. If you're going to assess meter-sized minimum charges, you do need to know, or at least you need to assume, the meter sizes that each customer is served by. And it's possible you might not know the meter size of some of your customers. So you're going to have to make an assumption if you go meter size based. Usually, my recommendation on that is, if you don't know the meter size and type, then you just charge based on the smallest or the lowest minimum charge for that customer, until maybe somehow you find out what the meter size and type is. You should know, yeah, those that are 2-inch and larger, because a 2-inch meter is a pretty big deal water connection. But I bump into some where they just don't quite know for sure what it is, but they kind of think it's bigger than 2. The practicality part is if the dollar difference in the minimum charge for a small meter, basically you can think residential versus commercial or especially industrial. If the dollar difference in the minimum charge, meter size base, for a residential customer is not very much less than, say, a 2-inch meter customer, then for practical purposes, it's kind of handy having a simple rate structure. If you're served water, your minimum charge is this. You have to have a pretty good percentage of meters that are 2-inch and bigger, and especially a few 4s, and maybe even a 6 or 2. You have to have several of those before their minimum charge amounts to enough to buy down the minimum charge for the vast majority of customers, the residentials, and get their minimum down enough to make it worthwhile to have the complicating factor of meter-sized rates. I recommend you go meter size, but I also calculated rates in a description-based structure, one for water, one for sewer. And then in sewer, I calculated one other variable, and that is if you continue to pay stormwater expenses out of the sewer fund, then the bills need to be different. And the way it worked out is the revenue increase for water, regardless of structure type, whether it's meter size based or description based, the revenue needs to go up 29% initially, and then match inflation later. On the wastewater side, again, regardless of whether it's meter size based or description based, the revenue needs to go up 60%. That's not paying for any stormwater. Add in the stormwater expenses, and the revenue needs to go up 97%. So it's, the sewer bills basically need to be 37% more if you're going to keep paying for stormwater expenses out of sewer. That 37%, I did a quick calculation out of the table 18, which all of you have a copy of, and we'll look at that in a little bit. But I did a quick comparison of the bill increase for the average residential customer, and that's 4,000 gallons. You're actually, I think it's 100 or 200 gallons different. I can't remember whether it was higher or lower. But 4,000 is a good number to kind of put in your head. The dollar difference between paying for stormwater versus not paying for stormwater is about $7.80 a month. So the stormwater bill for a residential small meter customer needs to be about $7.80 more to pay for basically the capital improvements that you need to do here pretty soon on the stormwater side. That gives you a sense of the effect of paying for stormwater through wastewater. You might figure, well, it's a lot easier. Again, we're going back to practicality. It's a lot easier to just leave that $7.80 on the sewer bill, and yes, it would be a lot more convenient to do that. The difficulty is Walmart, and there's some industrial thing up north, and the railroad, and there's a whole lot of really big impervious lots up and down 36. That's how I drove over here. Those kinds of properties, it's not fair to only assess them for stormwater the same fee that you would just the average for the whole town. Residentials, and this is very, very common. You can't call it a rule, but it's very, very common. Impervious surface on in-town residential lots is very commonly right at 2,000 square feet. So the rooftop, driveway, maybe an outbuilding, sidewalk, that stuff is impervious surface. It usually amounts to about 2,000 square feet per residential property. Walmart is, and you don't have the super center, you've got a regular Walmart, so I think it's only about 10 acres, but you can, residential, an in-town residential lot usually is about a third of an acre. So if you multiply 3 times 10, that's 30. Walmart should be paying 30 shares just based on the lot size. But the reality is, almost all of Walmart's lot and the building and all that kind of stuff, it's almost all impervious surface. Whereas in a residential property, it's a quarter or so impervious surface. So in reality, Walmart needs to be charged 30 times the residential, plus charged another 4 because of the impervious surface on that kind of a property.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Where does Walmart's water drain to?
I do not know.
Does it drain into our storm sewer system?
It runs to the creek
Outside
behind
of,
Does
hometown.
it go out of town?
outside of city property?
Okay.
Like proper city property, so that's where it gets dicey.
Yeah, there's that, and similar situation, you serve, I think you serve a few sewer customers out of town, don't you? Okay.
No,
so-
not sewer.
No.
Only water.
Okay.
You have to
Then-
annex in if you have sewer.
Then the issue of charging more because stormwater is in it isn't in play because they're out of town, because they otherwise would not be subject to the same regulatory requirements for stormwater management. So there's that kind of an issue. The issue you're talking about, the property might be in town, but it doesn't go through any in-town drainage system, basically. It just almost immediately goes to the county. I doubt if the county is subject to phase 2 stormwater requirements. I'm thinking that's why you all are doing some pretty expensive stormwater improvements. Anyway, you're right. There are complicating factors, either stormwater in sewer or a separate stormwater fee. Now it's pretty clear that if the property is outside of town and if the stormwater doesn't come into town, then you don't charge them stormwater fee.
But if the property's in town,
Yeah, but
but
if
they
the
drain
property is
to
in
the county.
town, but it's running out of town, and it's not a drainage that you have to deal with, then you may not be charging them, or it may be fair to not charge them. In the overall scheme of things, stormwater doesn't care whether a property is in town or out of town. If it's created, it goes into a stream, and, if the quality's bad, if it's real peaky and it, erodes creek channels, and if it does the things that stormwater does when it comes off of impervious surface, especially if it comes off of 10 acres of impervious surface, that's a lot of water that comes out. It causes problems. Now I'm not a real big time. We need to go after stormwater created in town because of impervious surface on properties and stuff like that, because that's the root of all of our water problems. No. Marysville, your stormwater generation, yeah, it causes some peaks in the receiving streams when it rains hard, even just coming off of residential. But it does not cause the peaks in it, especially in most properties anyway, does not cause the water quality degradation that a lot of other real big effectors of land and stormwater yield do. I'm talking about ag, and it's hard to get after ag. We all need to eat and stuff like that. But it's a complicated issue, how to deal with stormwater. It mostly gets simpler if you pay for it through the wastewater fees. But there's some unfairness involved in that too. But the number to kind of keep in mind is the difference between with stormwater and without stormwater, the last two tables comparing bills in that handout. The dollar difference in the bill increase for a 4,000 gallon customer is a real good estimate of what your coming stormwater improvements are going to cost on a per customer per month basis. That's about $7.80. It's normally best to split stormwater off and have a separate fee for stormwater. So it probably would average around $7.80, but once you factored in the really big impervious surface properties, and those would be paying not $7.80, but they'd be paying $780 or some bigger number, the $7.80 would go lower. I doubt if it would go below $5, but it would go lower than $7.80. You won't know where that plays out until you analyze it. But at least the difference between those two models will give you a pretty good ballpark idea of what stormwater is going to cost you. Okay, I've given you kind of some introductory information. I'm going to go to a few parts of the report, and I don't think you all have the full report, and that's fine that you don't. But I'm going to point out a few things which I think are pretty important for you all. I've already described that the first model in water and also in sewer is the meter size based minimum charge. The second model is the description based rate structure. And then for sewer, the third one is also pay for stormwater. So why don't you keep looking at that table 18, and I'm going to go with you through how these effects work out. And do I need to be on the mic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Try. Go ahead and pull it closer.
All right. I'm going to go through with you how these things work out. Now, I didn't put in the table 1 for water, the very first page. I didn't put in all of the meter sizes. I put in the most common one. That's going to be residential, 5/8 inch meter, in town, out of town, and then bulk water, just so you get a sampling of the effect. So for an in-town meter size base minimum charge structure, an in-town, basically residential customer using 4,000 gallons, their bill right now is $47.43. It needs to go to $61.50. That's $14.08. Their bill needs to go up $14.08. That's for that kind of customer. You can see a customer that happens to use 100,000 gallons, their bill needs to go up $165 per month. Out of town, it's a similar situation, except you need to, well, you don't need to, but you already do assess a premium for out-of-town water service. You should assess a premium because if you'll think of the water system like this, most of the water system is in town. And then whenever you go out of town, basically by definition, you're going farther to serve somebody. Plus, you do not have the opportunity to generate revenue from a property outside of town that you can in town. You can't do general bonds based on that property, only property that you can assess for a general obligation bond. You cannot assess property tax for an out-of-town property. You have ways of being able to generate revenue which you can use to help support water and sewer in town, but you can't do that out of town. And out-of-towners come in town and use your streets, they shop at the stores, they come to City Hall to do business of some sort. They come in here and they use infrastructure that you and others have built to be able to support the town and also some folks outside, but you don't get reimbursed for that cost. They're using up your infrastructure. So because you cannot raise revenue in the various ways from out-of-towners that you can in-towners, charging them a premium to recover the difference in the cost to serve them is reasonable. You already do that, but as I recall, it's only like 7.8 or 8 point.
Little.
Yeah, it's very, very small difference. When I see out-of-town service, I usually see the out-of-town premium, is what I call it, the out-of-town premium or the increased rate at somewhere between 25% more than in-town service, up to double the cost of in-town service. The most common premium I see is 50%, and that's what I recommend for you all. Go to a 50% premium for out-of-town service. Now, you don't have very many of those customers. It's not a big revenue difference. You know, it's not that sort of thing. The issue is rate structure fairness. They cost you more to serve. You should collect more from them. So, the out-of-towners, their bill would also go up, but it's starting higher. Go to the next page, and that starts, that's water 2. That is a description-based structure, so the bill would be the same for the minimum, and the only difference would be the unit charges paid. For a 4,000 gallon per month customer, their bill needs to go up $16.39. For a meter size based bill, it was $14.08. So what that tells you is it costs $2 and about 15 or 20 cents more for the average residential customer if you stay with a description-based rate structure. Or in my cost of service analysis mindset, their bill becomes less fair on a description-based structure than if they pay a meter size-based minimum charge. Not a big deal. It's only about $2 a month. There's a lot of convenience to having a level minimum charge. Somebody comes in and they ask you, hey, how come my bill was this much this month? You find out that they're in town and you can tell them, well, your minimum charge is this much, because everybody's minimum is the same in town. And then you find out how much they used and you multiply that by the unit charge and there's the bill. So if their bill went up a bunch, then their use, except, for the month at the old rates versus the month at the new rates where you change over, except for that situation, their bill only goes up because they use more, not because they have a bigger meter. That costs your average residential customer about $2 a month to have a more convenient kind of a structure. That's not a big deal. I almost always prefer meter size based because if it's a couple of bucks for the average residential, I like to try to, if I can, get the rate structure as close to cost to serve, mathematically cost to serve, as possible. But I recognize that you all are just trying to deal with the practicalities of the water utility too. So that table is description-based water rates. Next table over is the sewer rates model 2024-1. So that middle page, the bill for that same customer, 4,000 gallons per month, needs to go up $21.48. That's if it's meter size based. Flip over to the next page. If you go description based, so everybody pays the same minimum, it needs to go up $26.55. So it needs to go up about 4.5, and I guess it's about $5 if you stay description-based. And then that last page is if you stay description-based, plus you pay for stormwater out of sewer. Then the bill needs to go up $34.44, which is that $7.80 or so differential. So that's the effect of stormwater. That's how you can use that Table 18. Table 18 does not tell you what the minimum charge and what the unit charges are. It just tells you for a certain volume in either meter size based or description based, the bill it was such and such, and it will be such and such, and the dollar increase per month would average for that kind of volume a certain amount, $14, $16 or whatever increase. Okay, $14 increase, $16 increase, and then another $7.80 increase for that third one. So add those last two together. That's a pretty hefty increase in my experience. Most of the time, the increases I see are $5 for average residential, are $5 a month or less, most of them. What your increases show, they're basically two things. Right now, your rates are not high enough, and it's a little bit of a bad comparison to compare what the current bill is with what the bill needs to be, because our basis, what the current bill is not enough. At that rate, at some point, something is going to have to happen to the water utility and especially the sewer utility, and it could be a really bad thing. In the extreme, it could be failure. Probably not. You know, you're not going to let the water and sewer go down. Eventually, you all and folks out there who have to pay the bills, eventually they're going to pay what it takes to be able to keep the water and sewer coming. It's just the nature of the beast. But it's jarring to see a $7.80 or a $14 or $16 bill increase in water or sewer. And for those who have both, which is almost everybody, it's one plus the other. So they're talking something like $30 a month increase. But it highlights that your rates are not high enough now to pay what you're trying to pay for. And then the capital improvements that you need to do, especially the stormwater, that just really rocks the boat and would cause you to sink. You just have to have more revenue to be able to balance the budget with the incomes that you have coming in. Now I want to show you a few pages out of the report. In the report, I've basically described things that I've described to you now, and then I've also described things like your current structure is like this. I recommend that you go this way, and this is why. So I explain those sorts of things. So there's lots and lots of words. You know, I heard one council member over here talking about how she can read 3, 4, 5 books a week. Now, this you can slip this in there.
That was a long book and a very boring book.
This one is not as great as one of those Louis L'Amour westerns or whatever it is that you read, right? Yeah, I try to spice it up, but there's only so much you can do when you're talking about finance and rates.
Right.
But in the report, I describe a lot of other things. I'm not going to go into detail much more unless you all want to, but I do want to show you some pictures. well, actually, before I get there, sewer model. I want to show you the section of the report. There's one of these in each one of the model descriptions. The section where I say, this is how you implement Water Model 1 rates. So this is the set of rates that are meter size based, and they're fully adequate. And as I view them, they're fair based on cost of service analysis. So I described to you how to, when and how to adopt those kinds of rates and how to adjust rates in the future. And probably the main thing that you'll notice is this table A. This is that first table. Meter size based, the minimum charge for a 5/8, that's a 0.625 inch. So a 5/8 or a 3/4 inch meter, I calculated those to be the same. There's very little peak flow difference between those two meter sizes, and they're very commonly installed interchangeably for residential properties. So I think most analysts combine those two. So the starting minimum charge is $28.38 per month, and the unit charge is $8.28 per 1,000 gallons, and there's no usage allowance. Nobody gets any free water. They pay for all the water that they use. So $28.38 and $8.28. I have the same table in each one of the other models. The numbers are just different. And the real big difference is between the description-based and the meter size based. $28 and, let's go back, $28.38 is the minimum charge. If you go meter size based, it'd be $29.30, and then the unit charge also needs to go up because you're not bringing in as much revenue from the meter size based minimum charges. So the unit charge also needs to go up, not a lot, but to $8.63. Not a huge difference for the average residential customer. Now for a 4-inch meter customer, even the singlet meter, that's $29.30 a month, versus if they're paying a meter size based rate, the 4-inch singlet would be $191. So their bill is about the minimum charge bill is about 1/5 what it would be otherwise if it was meter size based. Again, if you don't have a whole bunch of 4-inch meters, the revenue difference is not a big deal to the city. But on the basis of rate structure fairness, meter size is fairer to the small meter customers. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the other tables of rates, but the rate needs to be higher, description based, than if you go meter size based. And then, whoops, that's out of town. And then starting sewer, the first model is you don't pay for stormwater out of it, and it's meter size based. So that's $32.26 and $5.86 per 1,000 gallons. And then to the next model, where it's description based, you can see the minimum stays the same, so it needs to be a little bit higher, $34.52, $6.57 for the unit charge versus $5.86. So the minimum charge would stay the same in description based, but the unit charge would need to be higher. And then the last model, where stormwater is also paid for, minimum needs to be $38.49, so it needs to be quite a bit more, and the unit charge needs to be higher, $7.55. Those are for in-towners. Now, I'm gonna take you to, I'll show you a couple of line graph tables that hopefully will be reassuring to you. Chart 8 depicts your total reserves. Blue line is if you were to adopt the rates that I've calculated. For that, this is the first model, meter size base. But that blue line and the red line keep the same track, except for just a little rounding error. Keep the same track, whether it's meter size based or description based, because I targeted a certain reserve level at the end of 10 years. So I wanted to end right where that pointer points. So regardless of who you get the money from, you need to get this much money to be able to pay for the water utility. You can see that that blue line is pretty level. It goes up a little bit sometimes, down a little bit sometimes, but it's headed for about the same level 10 years out. Now, I think your current reserve level is a pretty decent level. It needs to stay at that level. It'll go up and down a little bit because you have a few years, you have some big capital improvements and you're going to pay some cash for it. So you're going to use up some reserves. The red line depicts if you were to keep your current rates. Now you're not going to do it because in about 2027 you go broke in the water fund. So you're just not going to do that. You're going to raise revenues somehow. But if you were to keep those same rates for the next 10 years, you would be at a negative, a bit more than $4 million reserve. Or in other words, you're taking money from somewhere else to cover $4 million. Again, you won't really do that. You're going to raise water rates. You may do it in a different structure, a little different timing, something might be different, but you're not going to go negative, I'm pretty sure. Now, I have some clients that actually do go negative. Got one in California that I took on as kind of a charity case, really, because they were already negative. They had already gotten money from another fund within this little town, and quite a bit of it. They only have 200 connections, and they were in the hole by $50,000 whenever they came to me. And I told them, I'll show you how to pull your stuff out of the fire. So I did, and of course they're still negative. I don't know if I'll ever get paid by them, we'll see. But I wanted to help them out. They're negative by, it's about 25% of their annual budget. And they're continuing to head down that track. They haven't adjusted their rates yet. We really had a hard time getting their board, to bite the bullet and raise the rates. But they'll eventually do it because they'll use up all the money elsewhere in this little town, and then the whole town is broke, so they can't be doing that sort of thing. But the red line, no change. The blue line, adjust rates. Now the blue line also assumes that you're going to keep up with future inflation. So initially you need to do the adjustment that's in those tables, A, B, C, and so on. And then each year when you do your budget, if the next year's budget needs to be 3% higher than the current budget to keep even, then you're going to need to raise rates or raise revenues by 3%. So that's table 8 in the first model. Oops, I think I passed one. Okay, and here's the sewer model. let's see, while I'm here, this one assumes, you see the gold highlighted blocks with zeros in them? In Model 3, they have dollars in there. You're taking on some stormwater improvement costs, so there are dollars in Model 3. But in Model 1 and 2, there are no dollars in that table, which means the rates can be lower since the expenses are not so high. But the key that I want to show you, that I hope you will find kind of reassuring, is Table 8 for sewer. You're at, well, in the test year, you were at about $1 million. Went down this year. And then once you adjust rates, I've structured the rates of the initial adjustment. So again, you're going to stay fairly even. You'll grow just a little bit up toward where you were in the test year, but you actually won't quite get to where you were in the test year. If you do not adjust rates, then you're going to go to about a negative 8.4 million or something like that. Or in other words, you will head into or deeper into the hole by $750,000 or so per year, something on that order. Now, the red line, that's really, really ugly. Again, you won't do that. The blue line, you adjust rates and keep up with inflation, and you're going to be fine. Now, you're not going to be popular with people because you raised their bills by $14 and $16, you know, that sort of thing. But you will at least be appreciated because you kept the water and you kept the sewer working. You paid for the improvements that you need to make. And on the wastewater side, if you choose to keep the stormwater in there, you're going to fix some stormwater problems for the town. So you're going to get a lot of important stuff done in water and sewer and maybe stormwater. No, we don't like paying another 14 or 16 bucks. But if we do need to do things to keep the system working the way it should, then it just is what it is. That part of your story is either going on right now with a bunch of other towns, or if it's not going on right now, the expensive capital improvement thing, then it's coming. In this country, and I don't want to lay blame because, shoot, you know, we're all just trying to get by and make things work and things like that. But in this country, we built a lot of local government infrastructure, water, sewer, electric, stuff like that. At about the time of World War II and for a decade or two afterwards, we just invested in infrastructure like mad. And we even invested in some kinds of infrastructure, water and sewer in particular, real heavily in the 1970s and 80s, kind of into the 90s. We still weren't keeping up with the real need at that point. But since we built a lot of stuff in like 1945 and 50 and 60 and 70, somewhere along in there, that stuff is now 60, 70, 80 years old. It's worn out. We've used it up. So we need to replace a lot of stuff again. Other towns nearby, far away, you might look, you can go online and find lots of rates out there, and you may find other towns where their water bill, their sewer bill is less than what you would be at these calculated rates. If you were to dig deeper, you would probably find that they're still living on a 50 or 60 or 70-year-old infrastructure set. The bill's going to come due for them too. That's not terribly reassuring, but it's just the nature of the beast. We don't usually build the little infrastructure every year, and we just kind of keep on replacing every year a little bit. We go for as long as we can, and then eventually it breaks, and then we got to replace it. We do streets that way, we do airports that way, we do water and sewer we do pretty much everything that way.
This study, though, allows us to have room down the line here coming up to do more projects, more water lines, more replacement of sewer lines, et cetera, lining of sewer lines, et cetera.
This study, I'll go to, this one is,
Because I know
okay,
the
this
last
is
several years.
sewer model 1, table 5. This is the capital improvements plan. So you've got a lagoon wetland project, 1.8 million bucks that would be borrowed, 1.3 or 4 million that would be grant paid, and I think there's going to be some cash paid part, 240,000 bucks. The cash part is what hits you immediately.
Right.
The debt service is what hits you from here on out. But yes, all of these expenses are built into the calculation of the recommended rates.
Okay.
So, when you're showing the graphs, was there one that showed if we elected to do a little bit or included some stormwater work? I saw one with green on it. And I got a reason that I'm asking, because I think that's probably one of our, not our biggest concern, but I think it's something we have to think about, looking at what we're doing at the Nordis project, the long term.
Because that's not the only problem we have.
No, there's plenty waiting in the wings, yeah.
And I'm just gonna throw this out there too, is there a way to look at this? So say we're gonna tell people, your bill's gonna be, I'm just gonna throw a number out there, and this number is not official, okay? Your bill is gonna be $30 more a month, but we're gonna feather that in over 3 or 5 years, but we're also gonna keep up with inflation at the same time. Is there a way to approach it that way so there's not a shock and awe right off the bat?
I do sometimes calculate rates that are, I call that phased in. So the initial adjustment is not done just at one time, in 1 year. Instead, the initial adjustment might be spread over 2 or 3 years. I really never recommend going 5 years.
Well, no, I'm just throwing
But,
numbers out there.
Yeah,
Just-
2 or 3 years, I will occasionally model what would happen to the rates when you do it that way. Now, you have some pretty good reserves, at least during the test year, you had some pretty good reserves. On sewer, you might go negative if you were to do that. And when I modeled it, I'd be able to see what would happen. I think on water, you probably would be positive, but you would have lower reserves over the next 3, 4, 5 years because you're not bringing in as much revenue immediately and continuing to bring in that revenue each year for all the 10 years plus inflation. You're only bringing it, if you split it into thirds, you do this over 3 years. The first year, you're going to bring in a third of the extra revenue you need. Second year, you'll bring in 2/3 of the extra. The third year, you'll bring in all that you need. But for the first 2 years, you run a deficit. You haven't brought in all that you needed. Which means that to arrive in the 10th year at the same reserve level, your increases will need to be greater than, for example, in water is 29% overall initial revenue increase. It might be instead 32 or 33% or so.
Because you're figuring in your,
Because it's the same way if you buy a car cash, then your debt payment is 0 and you pay 0 interest. If you buy a car with a car loan and it's a 3-year loan, you limit the interest you pay. You go 6 years or longer, and you pay a whole bunch more interest. So it's the same phenomenon if you postpone the initial adjustment. But it's doable. It can be done. I've done it a good number of times. And if you all want to see what that would be like, then I could run scenarios where we do it in 2 years or 3 years, and you'd probably want to basically give me some guidance, probably through Cindy or Josh, but give me some guidance once I gave you the results of going 2 years or going 3 years. You might decide, well, we do want generally to phase, but we don't want to do 3, 4, 5 years. We want to go 2. And then I could revise the modeling, revise the report so that it shows you what the rates would need to be initially if you split the initial adjustment in half. The other downside to splitting the adjustment is the first adjustment is the only one that restructures rates so that they are, the Model 1s, those are cost to serve. So I take you all the way to a cost to serve rate structure. If we split it in half, then you only get half of the restructuring, the getting the rates fairer. Mm-hmm. You only get half of the total of that because of the splitting, because the future increases are going to end up being across the board. If inflation is 3%, and if you need to bring in another 20% revenue, then it's going to be a 23% across the board adjustment to minimum unit charges. So for those who are paying a bill that on a cost to serve basis is too high, and their bill needs to be less, with the amount of increase, it probably won't actually go down. It just won't go up as much as some others. But for that kind of a customer, they're not going to get all the way to cost to serve. The nature of the beast is those who are paying too much relative to others, they don't get all the way to fair. Those who are not paying enough don't get all the way to paying a fair rate, paying enough. Again, it's like meter size based versus description based. Practicality has to be considered. If the bill for the average residential customer is going to go up $30, and you consider that to be too much to put on folks in one fell swoop, and you cut it in half, we do it over 2 years, then maybe the bill needs to go up $16 or $16.50 in the first year, and then another $16 or $16.50 the next year to get all the way there.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
The long or the short is we have to come up with X amount of dollars one way or the other. It's just shuffling how it comes in over what time period. So I'm with Jeff. I think if we don't stage it in, then I think that's a bigger hit for people on fixed
Hey, we won't have to
income.
be sitting here.
Well, there's two thoughts on that. One is it's a bigger hit for people on a fixed income. It's hard enough for a lot of people for 15 or 16 or whatever, let alone double that. And the other thing is we have to be committed to keep staging because that is something that is.
When's the last time we raised the rates?
10 years.
Yeah. And we were supposed to keep on top of it after that, but the appetite disappeared. I'm sure you've heard that kind of thing before. That's how we got behind. Yes.
And that's what we need to
get hired.
That's what we need to focus on is the fact that we haven't touched anything in 10 years.
Yeah. And we've got to commit, and as best we can commit future people at this, horseshoe to stay on top of this so we don't end up with these big changes.
One other question I have when we go back, I'm going back to the stormwater side of things, and not just stormwater, but water and sewer. How often is it that do we ever pull funds out of the sales tax fund to help support any of those
Yeah, we just built a water line with it on Main Street.
Well, and so what I'm getting back to is the original intent of the sales tax back in when was that? When the,
19,
no, when it went in for the overpass.
yeah, yeah, 96 was the East Side Water District.
Yeah.
And then this water pass.
Was that 2009?
No, it wasn't that, it was longer ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 05.
I think it was
maybe.
4.
Was it 04?
4 or 5.
So the original intent of that sales tax that the voters passed was to do the overpass, the rail bed, or the levee, the rail bed, movement, and streets. And so far, we've been sucking that account down to help pay for these other projects that we're not funding.
Well, that sunsetted, and then it went back
And
to the
it-
voter.
and then-
it
yes.
became any general purpose. And that's
Right,
how
but
That's true.
I-
the point is,
Well, and connected to that, I mean, part of the reason I'm in favor of having a dedicated stormwater utility is, to me, it makes a lot of sense to fund water projects out of a dedicated fund, sewer projects out of a dedicated fund, storm sewer projects out of because for transparency, and people
Yeah.
know exactly what these funds are going towards. There's no, well, we pulled from here and pulled from there. It's just for pure government transparency, I think that's the way to go.
I think that's really the only project we've pulled from.
I mean, if we need to do other
Sales
things, we
tax.
can,
Right.
but I don't want that to be standard.
but we know
practice.
on top of our sewer, water, and stormwater projects, that we do have some other infrastructure that's been put aside because we're trying to fix these other things. And if this is an opportunity not to tax you more on the cost of your home or the value of your home, but just a fair, even keel charge for your water, your sewer, and stormwater, that might be the route to go. I can say that, for the larger properties, there's a lot of them that aren't draining into our stormwater, but I think if we figured out a way to still get some money out of those properties, because someday we might need to have
And
an improvement
So,
there.
yeah, when you said that, I was thinking about that. So the trouble is, there may be properties that are half in and half out, and there's some that maybe they only drain to themselves.
Yeah,
Or, and maybe we expand, and then we never thought it would drain into our storm sewer system, but the city expands, and now it is in our, so how do we go back? That gets pretty difficult to parse.
I don't think you can just be black and white and say, okay, square footage, this is what it's gonna be. But I think there needs to be a different rate structure. And I talked to Jeff about this early on when we first brought this thing up.
Yeah.
Maybe a different rate structure for X number of square feet over this, then it turns into this. Because we also don't wanna, have certain Walmarts and certain entities paying 50% of the storm and stormwater bill.
No, but it's a lot easier to track some of those bigger projects to specific stormwater problems we've had over the last 14 years.
Yes, we know that, Todd.
Okay.
Yeah,
What about, what he kinda talked about at one point was doing industrial at one rate, commercial at one rate.
right, that's what I'm saying. that-
Residential at a different rate, because measuring roofs and permeable surfaces and whatever, it gets kinda dicey. I mean, if we just rate structured it by type
Thoughts?
or
Well, let me-
size.
It's different when you're in Olathe, Kansas, or Denver, but it's different when you have large impermeable surfaces in a rural setting that aren't always going into storm and wastewater.
Yeah.
Some are, some aren't.
Part of what you all are discussing is actually a lot easier than what you might think it is. Most stormwater fees are based on the impervious surface area of the average residential property in the town. And most of them are about 2,000 square feet of impervious surface. So you come up with the basis for an equivalent dwelling or equivalent residential unit. The residential, almost all of your properties are residential. So in all likelihood, when you assign a fee for stormwater to properties, if it's single-family residential, it's this much. It's the lowest fee. And then if it's multifamily, if it's industrial, commercial, or whatever, but it's got a bunch of impervious surface, it's going to be multiples of the average residential, or the equivalent residential unit, so that 2,000 square feet of impervious. So Walmart, with their 10-acre lot and roof and everything, other than the fact that maybe they just drain right out of town and they're not subject, but to use them as an example of impervious, 2,000 square feet is the basis. They've got 10 acres, 43,560 square feet per acre. That divided by 2,000, and that becomes their stormwater fee, multiples of the residential size, and then all the other industrial types. So that means that the vast majority of your stormwater fees are just going to be that base fee, the residential fee. You're going to average it for all the residentials, and that's what you charge. So that makes it so you're only doing math on 5 or 10% of the properties. The rest of them that are residential, that's just the base fee. So it's not as hard as what you might think.
Because you would charge a flat fee then,
It's a flat fee for
not
the
a per
residential.
Yeah.
usage or whatever.
Yeah, the square footage,
It's just square footage.
yeah. And you'll get that data from I believe it's the county assessor. They have aerials, of the town that you can scribe off of to determine the square footage of the Walmart and the industrials.
Okay, and we're using the roof size and the parking lot, right?
Impermeable surfaces, so
Impermeable.
not grass and not.
Right.
Just roof size and parking lot. So schools, churches
Yeah, right.
have a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I kind of described that to Cindy and Josh, and for you all to kind of head that direction, you probably can do that on your own pretty well. That $7.80, average per property, is going to be in the ballpark of what the average is. Less for residentials, not by a lot, a whole lot more for Walmart and the great big properties. But hey, they generate a lot of stormwater. They're the root of a whole lot of your problem. All right, other questions, thoughts?
If we would step or phase in the water and sewer, but do the full stormwater, that's still gonna be $20-some
Mm-hmm.
if we raise that all at once.
If we staged the two and then just did the stormwater, I mean, I don't know, you could stage them all, I suppose, but we know the stormwater, we're already incurring
Right.
debt
Oh,
that we need to
already.
service for it.
Yeah, you're gonna burn through debt service cash
Yeah.
on that one.
So if we come up with a plan, could we, no offense, could we dumb it down so we could present it to the public? So they at least know about it a little bit before we make a decision?
Well,
To
yeah, well, I
let them.
definitely want to make sure they
Yeah,
know,
I
and
mean-
we can't blind
And,
everybody with numbers.
and let them know why.
Yeah,
Show
and
some
that's-
numbers of why we need to do
And
it.
that's the crux of why that we did this and why we're televised right now, is because we want to be transparent and have a basis that we're not just willy-nilly, well, we probably need X many percent. This actually lays out why we need specific amounts to maintain what we have and tackle problems we know we have. There's no really where to cut. I mean, unless you're abandoning water issues, we're going to incur more expense if we don't address it now.
Yeah,
And to your point of transparency, we also need to get in a place where we're not always reacting to issues. We need to
Yep.
get ahead of things, repair things before they go down, and this puts us in a good place to do that.
And I
And I think
firmly-
I think too, that if we show that we're being proactive towards these 3 utilities, and we can show them, hey, we've had to spend this kind of money out of sales tax to cover these things, but now that's gonna free up other money to work on some streets.
Other projects.
Streets and other projects. I think that's very important to let the public know that that's why we're doing it. We don't wanna add another 1/4% to fix roads around here. We wanna eventually maybe get to the point where we have a windfall and we can say, hey, we're gonna lower property taxes.
No, I mean, I firmly believe like a core function of us being here is leaving some of these things better than we found them. And right now it's in disarray, and this is a way for us, though it's not gonna be universally popular, a way for us to set it right and set it up for 10, 20 years from now.
I mean, speaking from a local business owner standpoint that consumes a lot of water, in a dental office, I understand the need for that, and we would be affected by it quite a bit, but at the same time, we gotta, like you said, leave it better than we found it. And I think that a lot of the problem is that since a lot of this is underground, people don't see this as a priority until it stops functioning. And when it stops functioning, then it is emergent.
I'm figuring 1408, 1639, and 780 is basically what we would be for the water, sewer, and stormwater.
1639 is the second water.
16.
It's not, well, you just pulled the first water and the second water, so it's actually
Yeah.
2148 instead of 16.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2148 and 1408 and 780.
Okay.
2108. 780.
Yeah, now the 780,
And those are on
that
4,000.
increase is on top of the increase from the previous model. The previous model did not have stormwater in it. The last model has stormwater. So you only pick 2 of the models.
Oh, you don't do all 3 of them?
No, you don't do all 3.
The third one had stormwater in it,
Okay.
Yeah,
on sewer.
So what if you did like a 60/40?
So 1408
2-year,
and 2148?
2-year increase, 60/40 plus.
61st year, 42nd year?
Somehow I had 34, 44, and 64.
Yeah, I could see it going to 3 years. I don't see it going beyond that.
No.
I mean, I really think it's a tough balancing act to balance that, especially if we're gonna have the stormwater utility, and I fully support our creating a stormwater utility that's separate. I think maybe we do the 3 years, just because even then the initial jump's gonna be enough.
yeah.
But, I'm gonna tell you, everybody here, I know enough about water rates in a couple other towns, but there's definitely a lot of people who think our water and sewer rates are the highest around, but I do not think.
No, I talked to Kobe Solodchik today and asked him, what are you guys paying for water in Hanover? We're cheap.
A lot of small towns, to your point, have gotten by a long time, and unfortunately, unlike us, they've had declining populations, and now they've gotta fix 50, 60-year-old infrastructure that was built for 400 people, and there's 200 people there.
Right.
So,
Or they're buying water from rural water districts still.
right.
The only thing I don't like about stretching out the phasing portion is, to his point, it takes the fairness out of it.
Yeah, you're right.
Some people never get a fair price the longer we phase it out. And, I mean, I think we have to be smart about that.
And 2 years would cut that back a little.
I like a 2-year approach.
We don't need to extend it over that. I want to keep things rolling.
And we can't kick it down the road, because we're just
No.
building the problem,
Yeah.
so.
That's been done 10 years in a row now, we need to do something.
So 1408 and 2148
Yes.
is what we're, okay.
That's if you use 4,000 gallons on a 5/8.
It's 40.
So-
About 4,000, yeah.
Be 34, 44, and 21 per end.
So it's 1406.
It's 61, it's 6150.
2148 plus 780.
Yeah, not plus the 780.
No,
That's
if you
already
use that
included in
last
Model
one.
3.
That's got
That's
the
what I
seven
thought. Okay.
calculated in.
So it's 1408 plus 2148.
35.56.
3556 divided by 2 equals 1778 a year for 2 years.
But like
But
you said,
it won't be enough then.
like you said, we need to
Gotta
go a
add
little
inflation.
above that to build in so,
You
So
can't just
you'd have
divide
to
it
go
in
like
half.
18.
like
so-
18 or,
You won't. catch
Instead
up.
of
You know,
16.
by the time you figure your inflation value in there, you're
You're gonna
looking
have
at
to add that
21.
again, the second year, it's gonna be even
Second
way
year.
higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could.
But I think we need to have like a calculated
Yeah.
chart that shows based on
You want a 2-year and a 1-year coming in?
At this
Yeah.
point, is the
Yeah,
Yeah,
council
if we could do that.
sure that they'd like to move to the size, meter size base? Or
I think-
versus
thinking more the
description?
I think so.
I feel that
yeah.
we do, yes.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
like
so
that.
that way
I like
Carl
the
can
meter-
then
I like the
focus
meter
on-
size. It's the fairest
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah,
Yep.
if we're depicting meter size and also description base, I already have 5 models, and if we're splitting one of them in half, then we have 10 models, and it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah.
Let's
For
just go
them
meter,
especially,
meter
Yeah, we
size.
just want meter size.
Yeah, meter
Meter
size.
size.
We'll give Jeff a heart attack.
Huh?
We'll give Jeff a heart attack.
On meter size,
It'll take a,
that's where I think almost all utilities of your size and bigger are actually a couple thousand connections or so, and bigger, that's where they're all going now.
Standard, yeah.
They're not staying with description based.
I think it's the fairest overall.
I do too.
How many connections do we have?
1,600.
I think it's right
it's
here,
listed, yeah.
1624.
Oh, yeah,
And
okay.
the place where description based works really good, and it almost does not affect fairness, is the little 200 connection town, and it's all residential. Pretty much it's all the same. The minimum charge works just fine.
Right.
Right.
But you got some industrials, you got some real big commercial, you got some big customers, 8.7% are bigger than 2 inch. That's a lot.
That is a lot, yeah.
Is there thought on the, stormwater utility moving forward?
Well, I mean, I like splitting it off on its own entity. That's my point, or my opinion on it.
I agree too.
And I think if we're gonna do something, we just bite the bullet and do it all at once. in my
Yeah,
opinion.
now's the time to make
It's,
those
time to do it.
it's the most
To split.
transparent, and it's gonna set us up for success in the future, to be
And-
able to get things done without having to react all the time.
And people will, and again, the transparency, people will say,
Yep.
this is,
And I think it's the best way to sell things too.
Yep.
And
Is if you're
especially
just
since we have a
upfront.
big
project.
Yeah, on
stormwater project
On
coming.
stormwater, that one is actually a much simpler situation to comprehend, because you don't have a whole bunch of operating costs for stormwater. It's basically capital costs, building fixes. And when you build fixes, at least partially with debt service, you can show people a payment. The payment is gonna be this much. So we need to get this much from each one of you to pay the stormwater bill, to pay the payment.
Right.
Whereas on water and sewer, you've got operating costs, electric, and a whole lot of other things.
Labor and everything.
And those are more difficult, they add to the complexity of examining, well, where do the dollars come from? Stormwater, it's easy.
And it's pretty, I mean, most people can accept that it's an obvious expense, not something we're choosing, that we're, it's not an optional project.
You can't cut back on debt service.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so we need to create a fund for stormwater. Mhm. We have to find an ordinance to do that.
Yeah.
It's done that. And right now, well, we'll worry about that later, with what we're paying.
But we're not gonna do it. I don't feel comfortable. I would like to get some information presented
Yeah.
before we make a
All
decision
broke out.
next week. I mean, we need to have it broke out so
I feel like that's implied.
we can get some feedback
Yeah.
from people. you
For
know.
sure.
We don't need to create a fund just yet.
And
I
everybody,
just have to look up how to do it.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I want to research, tell me what I have to research to do.
and expect questions from people in
Absolutely.
between
Yeah.
now and then.
Right,
This-
no.
we'll,
We're not gonna
you know,
write an
talking
ordinance
points.
till I know.
Okay,
Right.
good. If I show up Monday and there's an ordinance,
No.
I'm gonna go, what? There you go.
We don't even know how yet. Okay. I'm just trying to, it takes a while.
Get ahead of the game.
And we need to call our software people about changing from what we have to meter size, because that means we have to set up 3 tables, 4
Yeah.
tables.
Yeah,
That all will be a bigger deal with trying to set up software. So those are the kind of things I have to
So
research.
let's see, this is August, September, October, November, December. Start January 1st if we get it done.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying we can't, I just want to know what I have to
Yeah.
start researching.
Can we move ahead that fast?
Sure.
Sure.
It works,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's something, I mean, we could implement it in the middle of the year, but I think it would be better if we did it.
Well, and this allows people to see it
Yeah.
coming, and if it is difficult to make those increases, they can plan for that increase that's coming
And the al-
without dropping it on somebody.
Now, the other thing we have, like currently, you know, we have the sewer rate, we have a set sewer rate for the summer. And a set, and for the winter months, we go off what was metered. That'll completely disappear then, correct?
Well, now you're talking about residential sewer bills.
Yes.
No, you'll continue to bill that way. It's called winter average billing.
Okay,
So residential, and that's about as fair as we can get for residential use. You average their bill based on whatever the rates are at the time. You average their bill through whatever winter months you choose.
Right.
That's
And then they pay the same amount
through the summer.
all the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Set sewer is not going away.
Okay, that's what I was curious about.
It's just gonna be higher.
Sure.
During the, yeah, because it'll be based off your winter rates.
And the people that have their sprinkler systems will still, that'll be,
There's no
And
sewer
then
attached
the
to
sewer,
sprinkler.
So they don't pay sewer on that. And again, that's a
Just
rate
to-
structure fairness thing. They're not causing a cost to the sewer system when they spray water out on the lawn.
Yeah, like I said, I was just curious about the
How do
sewer
they-
rate
how
during
do
the
they
summer.
figure that?
We take an average, we have
Oh, you just.
a calculated
average it out.
average of each person
Gotcha.
separately, and then we do one as, the average in the city. So like if I didn't have water in the winter,
Yeah.
and I just started in the spring, then this city average is given to that person.
Yeah. And that goes back to that practicality thing. You don't have a basis otherwise to charge them for sewer, so you just come up with the average for residential.
And then the next year they'll have one.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you have a big water leak in the winter, in the months that would affect you, we throw that big number out. You know, so if you're the person, the water pipe broke in February, and you used
Skew it.
10,000 gallons of water, it would skew your water,
Yeah.
and we do throw that number out to help people out. Yeah, or your water softener. Your water softener, maybe.
Already had that happen.
I've had that too.
I've had it spike.
Well,
Jeff
Even
calls
even
me
at
and
the
goes, I
den-
don't know what's going on.
even at the dental office with that much usage, it was like,
Yeah,
this is
that's
a
where it was.
significant spike. I was like, oh.
Water softener.
Flooded my basement, I had 8 inches of water.
I told my wife I was washing my hands like I was supposed to.
All right, maybe a smidge for closing. You all actually have a really good handle on this stuff. You've got these concepts really well, and you also recognize that you can't do that red line thing, go down negative 4 million, 6 million, and stuff like that.
You're gonna be broke on the sewer side next year.
Yeah.
Literally
Yeah,
next year.
Yeah, it's.
That's
gonna
scary.
happen
We do have the
next year.
stormwater project in there, that didn't help.
And
Yeah.
and that's,
That kind of,
that's why I
Send us in a
said,
hurry.
when I run the modeling, when we stretched the initial adjustment out over a year or two, and I think we're aiming at 2 mainly. If you stretch it out too long, and you're headed towards zero real soon, then you don't have the luxury of time
Right.
to be able to stretch it out beyond a certain point. I'll see that whenever I do the modeling, and then I'll be able to tell, Cindy and Josh what's going on, and it's possible, I don't think it would happen, but it's possible on sewer anyway, that you just can't stretch it out. It may be that you need so much more revenue for sewer immediately that you can't do it. Just as I say that, the water fund is in pretty good shape, and it should be even if you split the increases in half, the initial. And it may be able to lend to the sewer fund for a year or two to get it through a low period. I'll they'll be able to see that when I model it too. I don't like to see one fund borrowing from another,
Yeah.
because sometimes it becomes a grant, even though, things happen.
Our auditor don't like that either.
No, not at all.
But, I have can't remember which one it is, Willard, Missouri. They're in a bad way. They have some real big capital improvements going on right now, and they didn't have the funds set up to be able to pay for it. So they're gonna have to raise their water and sewer rates a ton, and sewer is still gonna go in the red by about $750,000 in 2025.
Holy. Wow.
But water is gonna have about $1.5 million, so they'll be able to, lend back and forth. And the deficit's only gonna happen that one time. They're doing this one big capital improvement right now. So once they hit the bottom of the trough, then they'll start to grow back out, and it'll be about 3 years after that, they will fully pay the water fund back. And then they'll get to their reserve target.
Would it be a thought to do all the sewer at one time because that's in such terrible shape, and do the water half and half?
I think
Would that be
I think the next report he gives us will give us a
tell you
better
that.
idea on how.
I just wondered if that would work at all, if you think that, the sewer is so dire, which it is.
I mean, that's pretty bad.
I think we can't make that decision tonight.
Until we see that.
No, that's a very.
But, it could be something that we have to think about.
Yeah.
So we have options to do it whichever way based on what he models, and we see what's going on.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. That's one of the, I love modeling rates, because I build the virtual reality of what your utility finances is, and then I can do what ifs. What if we split the increase, over 2 years? What if they postpone this capital improvement for 3 years? What if they get a bigger grant or a small? I can do what ifs, and the rates pop out real nice.
Yeah, the status of that.
So I'll find out pretty soon what your picture's looking like if we split the initial adjustments into, be able to let you know.
I just don't think we can postpone Nordis.
No.
There's
No,
no way we
that's-
can postpone
No,
this.
and that's definitely a sewer hit, because you're not gonna have any money in storm sewer yet.
Right.
You're gonna have to pull it from sewer. You don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Unless you try to.
Well, thank you very much for
Yeah, thank
this
you.
information. We'll eagerly await the further calculations.
Well, in this case, I don't even need to get data or anything from you all. This is just a preference change in how to arrive at the new rate. So that's a quick one.
Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
All right. I don't know if you all have other business or anything.
This is all that's on the call. You're it.
All right.
How far are you from home?
Move to adjourn?
About a 6-hour drive.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn.
I'll stay there.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
So, where, I know I said Jefferson.